The wind on Viral 3 carried the taste of metal and dusk, a strange bitterness Mira hadn't tasted since the night her life fractured. She lay half-curled on the cracked basalt surface, her long white hair tangled against the stone, the embroidered cuffs of her ceremonial sleeves torn to ribbons by the ravine's jagged edge. Her elongated ears, once the pride of her lineage, twitched weakly at the low, vibrating groan of the dying sun. She wasn't sure how long she'd been conscious. Minutes, hours, a lifetime. The world swayed between fever and freezing clarity. Every breath scraped through her ribs like broken glass. It was almost funny. Her people had banished her with the precision of a mathematical equation. One refusal spoken before the council, one clean exile carved into tradition, and one daughter abandoned to the wilderness of a frontier world. She had always known her voice mattered too little to change the fate chosen for her, but she hadn't known it could cost her everything. Her fingers brushed the crushed remnants of the silver ear cuffs worn by every daughter of House Aeryllis. They'd fallen off when she'd hit the rocks, or maybe she had torn them away in the dark. She couldn't remember. Mira whispered to the emptiness, her voice barely more than an exhale. At least the stars look honest tonight. They didn't respond, of course. Nothing on this planet responded. Nothing except the wind until the wind changed. A low, uneven thrum rolled over the plains, not the silent glide of an Aeryll vessel. This was louder, jagged, rhythmic, wrong. Mira's ear flicked, instinctively tracking the sound. Light flared across the cracked horizon, white and harsh and utterly foreign. A ship. Small, battered, stitched together from mismatched metals and stubborn engineering. A human ship. For a moment, Mira wondered if Exile had finally broken her mind. But then the vessel landed with a jarring cough of its engines, kicking up spirals of dust. A ramp descended. Heavy boots hit stone. A silhouette stepped forward, broad-shouldered, cautious, scanning the landscape with a handheld lamp. The light swung and caught her face. "Well, damn," the human muttered. A man's voice, rough, low, and strangely warm compared to the cold she'd wrapped herself in. "That's not a rock." Mira wanted to speak, to ask him politely to hallucinate more quietly, but all that came out was a strained hiss of air. The boots moved faster, knees hit stone beside her. Hands calloused hot, impossibly alive, touched her neck, checked her pulse. "Hey, stay with me." His tone softened as though speaking to a wounded animal. "Can you understand me?" She managed a faint nod. Her ear brushed his palm. She heard him pause. "Aeryll," he murmured. "Right, okay, Bits medkit, the real one, not the duct tape tragedy." A tiny robotic voice crackled from somewhere behind him. "Define real. All your kits contain duct tape." "The expensive one, you gremlin." Warm arms slid beneath her. Mira tried to protest, to explain that she was an exiled noble, and this sort of physical contact was profoundly inappropriate. But the words dissolved as he lifted her into a steady, unshakable hold. Being carried shouldn't have felt safe, yet somehow waking felt like dragging herself through thick, warm fog, unpleasant, disorienting, but unmistakably alive. Mira blinked slowly at the ceiling above her. Corrugated metal panels patched with welded plates, a tangled ribbon of wiring running along the seam like a nest of metallic vines. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, machine grease, and something vaguely edible simmering nearby. "She's awake," a tiny voice chirped overhead. Artificial, high-pitched, annoyingly cheerful. "Bits," a deeper voice answered, tired but patient. "What did I say about announcing people's cortisol levels the moment they open their eyes? It's medically relevant." "It's rude." Mira turned her head, regretting it instantly as pain flared through her ribs. Still, she managed it, and found herself staring at the human who'd lifted her from the rocks. He sat on an overturned crate, elbows resting on his knees, watching her with eyes the color of pale green crystal. His hair was dark with streaks of silver woven through it, pulled back in what looked like a half-hearted attempt at a ponytail. His beard was equally undecided, somewhere between intentional and forgot to shave for several days. The man looked tired, worn, solid, and for reasons she couldn't understand, safe. "Welcome back," he said, offering her a small smile that softened the lines around his eyes. "You've been out about 18 hours. Gave me enough time to pretend I know anything about igneous rock formations." Mira blinked. He took that as encouragement to continue speaking. "Water." He lifted a container made out of 3 mismatched bottles fused together. "It's filtered. Bits says the purification system is operating at 93% efficiency, which is better than my liver." 92.8, Bits corrected from above. And your liver would perform better if you stopped consuming coffee, as if it were a survival mechanism. Coffee is a survival mechanism. Mira accepted the bottle, drinking hurt but in a manageable way. The water tasted faintly metallic, but her body welcomed it with desperate gratitude. "I'm Jackson," the man said once she'd lowered the bottle. "Jackson Rourke, pilot, mechanic, accidental explorer, and full-time babysitter to one extremely judgmental onboard intelligence." "I am not judgmental," Bits protested. "You are simply wrong often enough for corrective feedback to be necessary." Jackson sighed. "See, she's relentless." Mira stared at him, unsure where to begin. With gratitude, confusion, or the crushing realization that she was not dead, which meant she had to live with everything that came before. "You took me from the plains," she said quietly. "Rescued," Jackson corrected, raising a finger. "Possibly saved from imminent doom, definitely not kidnapping." "I was exiled," she murmured. The admission cracked something inside her chest. "Left to die." Jackson's expression softened without pity, which somehow made it easier to bear. He leaned back, hands loose on his knees. "You're alive now," he said simply, "and you're aboard the Pathfinder. She's old, she complains constantly, and I fix her with duct tape more than I should, but she flies." A groan shuddered through the ship's frame as if to contradict him. "See," Jackson spread his hands, "perfectly healthy." "Define healthy," Bits muttered. Mira lowered her gaze to her hands. The ceremonial paint on her fingertips was smeared, the once intricate patterns now ghosts of a life she had been cut from. "Your injuries were pretty bad," Jackson said gently. "Broken ribs, dehydration, exposure. I patched you up, but you'll need real medical care when we reach a station." Mira's throat tightened. "Why would you help me?" He shrugged. "You were dying. Didn't seem like the kind of thing to ignore." Among her people, nothing was done without purpose. Every choice was weighted, recorded, judged. This man spoke as though kindness required no justification at all. "What were you doing on Viral 3? He asked, her voice faltered. "I refused a binding." Jackson blinked. "A binding like marriage." She nodded. "And they dumped you on a frontier planet." Jackson frowned, baffled. "My cousin refused to marry someone once. The worst thing that happened was a very awkward holiday dinner." "It is not the same," Mira whispered. "Among the Aeryll, refusal before witnesses is final. It is considered an offense to the lineage. My family severed me." Jackson looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "That's messed up," he said bluntly. Mira's lips twitched despite herself. No one back home would have dared speak of the council like that. This human said it casually, like mentioning a faulty generator. "Anyway," he added, pushing himself to his feet, "you're not on that rock anymore, you're here. There's terrible coffee, Bits judging me, and a ship that groans every time we take a sharp turn. But there's no exile." The station appeared out of the darkness like a wounded star. Uneven patches of metallic glow, docking arms jutting at awkward angles, whole sections that seemed welded on as an afterthought. Mira watched it through the viewport, hands clasped in her lap, ears angled forward in instinctive alertness. Jericho Outpost, a lawless trade hub on the edge of a quiet system. Busy, chaotic, unpredictable. Jackson guided the Pathfinder toward its docking port with the kind of relaxed confidence that made Mira nervous. The ship groaned under each course correction, but he patted the console every time it shuddered, murmuring reassurances as though soothing a living creature. "I promise you," he said, "she only screams like this when she's happy." Bits immediately countered. "We are not happy. We are approaching with a critically unstable starboard thruster." "It's only unstable if you look at the diagnostic tools, so stop looking." The station swallowed them in shadows and harsh white lights. The moment the landing clamps engaged, Mira felt something shift inside her. A cold, invisible pressure. Memory trying to pierce the fragile shell she'd built around her sense of self. Stations were places where Aeryll delegates walked with elegance, where noble daughters moved through corridors with their heads high, where people bowed at Mira's presence. Now she stepped onto the metal platform in borrowed clothes, ribs still aching from exile, her hair braided simply because Jackson hadn't known any other way to help her tie it back. Her ears, once adorned with cuffs carved by artisans, were bare, and she felt exposed. Jackson walked half a step ahead of her, not shielding, not hovering, just there. Present enough for anyone watching to understand she wasn't alone. "Stay close," he murmured. "Jericho's neutral territory, but neutral doesn't mean safe." She nodded, adjusting her posture. Even stripped of her heritage, her training remained. Walk with balance, Listen before speaking, read the room, but she wasn't prepared for the voice that cut through the noise. Mira. She froze, every muscle in her body stilled. The air seemed to fold. When she turned, she saw a woman standing near a merchant stall, tall, graceful, wrapped in deep blue Aeryll delegational robes. Her ears were adorned with polished silver cuffs, family markers glinting beneath the station's lights. Lias, once Mira's closest friend. A companion through childhood festivals, diplomatic tutelage, and long afternoons spent memorizing the constellations carved in the temple ceilings. Lias walked toward her with a slow, deliberate intensity that felt like a blade. Mira Aeryllis, she said, voice cold enough to burn. So the rumors were true. Mira swallowed, her heart pounding painfully. Lias, I didn't know you were. You shouldn't be here. Lias's gaze swept over her clothes, her lack of cuffs, her posture. You should be dead. Jackson shifted subtly, his presence steadying. Her pulse steadied too. Lias' eyes flicked to him with open disdain. You've attached yourself to a human after bringing ruin to your family. I haven't attached myself to anyone, Mira said, trying to keep her voice even. Hey, she saved your life, Jackson interjected mildly, hands in his pockets. Well, technically I saved her life, but Bits supervised. This doesn't concern you, human, Lias snapped. Jackson didn't step back, didn't bristle. He simply tilted his head, calm and unbothered. See, here's where you're wrong, he said. Everything that affects her concerns me. Lias turned to Mira again, disgust curling her lip. Your father resigned from the council. Your sister can't enter a single binding negotiation because your shame stains the family line. And you walk free with him. Mira's throat tightened painfully. Lias, please, you know why I refused. I couldn't. You wouldn't, Lias hissed. You always thought you were above tradition, above your duty. If you had died on that planet, at least your family could have mourned you with dignity. Something inside Mira cracked. Old pain, old loyalty, and the unbearable realization that Lias had come not to understand, but to wound. Jackson stepped forward before Mira could speak, placing himself between them, not aggressively, not with threat, but with a quiet solidity that forced Lias to halt mid-step. That's enough, he said, still calm, still soft, but with an undertone that felt immovable. We're done. Lias blinked, momentarily thrown off. You dare speak over me. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't shift his stance. But the air changed around him, like gravity had subtly realigned. She doesn't need your punishment, he said. She needed help, so I helped her. That's what people do when someone's dying on a rock. Lias looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. And what she saw, his scars, his relaxed readiness, the plasma cutter at his belt, made her hesitate. You don't belong here, she muttered finally. You shouldn't have survived. Good thing survival doesn't require your approval, Jackson said. Lias glared at Mira one last time. Eyes hollow, full of a grief Mira recognized too late, and turned sharply, sweeping back into the crowd. Silence settled around them. Mira hadn't realized she was shaking until Jackson turned to her. You okay? He asked softly. No, she whispered, but thank you. He shrugged lightly. Figured you didn't need to get insulted to death before your ribs heal. A sound escaped her, a broken laugh or a sob, she couldn't tell. Jackson didn't. Life aboard the Pathfinder settled into a rhythm Mira could not have predicted. The ship was loud, temperamental, and engineered with what appeared to be pure optimism. But it moved with a stubborn purpose that reminded her, uncomfortably, of Jackson himself. Days blurred into one another, carried along by the gentle hum of the engines, the metallic clatter of tools, and Bits, never-ending commentary on Jackson's questionable life choices. Statistically, Bits announced one morning as Mira tried to sit up without aggravating her ribs, you have already lived longer on this vessel than recommended by 3 mechanics safety guidelines. That's because those guidelines were written by cowards, Jackson said from beneath an open floor panel, only his boots visible. Hand me the wrench. No, the other wrench, the one that looks like it's judging me. All your tools judge you, Mira said softly. His boots froze. Then slowly he emerged from the panel, grease across his cheek, holding a cable that had clearly offended him. He stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. A warm, unguarded sound that filled the cramped cargo bay. See, you're fitting in just fine. She wasn't sure that was true, but she found it increasingly difficult to deny that she no longer felt like a dying stranger washed up on the edge of fate. She was present, awake, listening, and Jackson noticed everything. He noticed when her appetite dipped and quietly offered her the better half of whatever ration pack he dismantled into something resembling food. He noticed when her ribs hurt and slowed his pace so she wouldn't feel rushed. He noticed when the long-range comm crackled with Aeryll broadcasts and she turned away, pretending not to hear. He never pushed, never asked, never pried. But he noticed. Mira, in turn, observed him with an attention she hadn't intended. She watched the way he spoke to machinery with patient affection, as if the entire ship were a living being he refused to abandon. She studied the way he leaned over the navigation console, shoulders tense, until the stars lined up exactly the way he expected. She caught the faint smile he wore when Bits insulted him, as if the AI were an old companion whose nagging he secretly cherished. She noticed how his voice softened when he said her name. After 2 weeks, Mira could walk the length of the cargo bay without wincing. Jackson, of course, insisted on hovering behind her like a quiet gravitational field. "You sure you're okay?" he asked as she tested her steps. "If you fall, I'll get yelled at by Bits for the next 3 days." "You assume I would fall," she replied. No, I assume I would be blamed." Bits chimed in immediately. "Accurate." Mira found herself smiling, an instinct that had grown unfamiliar since exile. The expression startled her each time, yet it came more naturally around Jackson than anywhere else. 3 days later, while Mira was carefully aligning nutrient cartridges in the ship's tiny hydroponics panel, Jackson approached with unusually forced casualness. "So, I might have accepted a contract." She turned a contract. "A survey assignment in the Kepler belt. 3 months. Just me, a lot of rocks, and Bits complaining about my piloting." "Your piloting is statistically suboptimal," Bits added. Jackson ignored that. "Point is, I need to go. But before you panic, wait, do Aeryll's panic visibly? Or is it internal? I can never tell." Mira blinked. "Jackson. Right, sorry. The thing is, I don't want you stuck on board for 3 months. You'd be bored. Or you'd fix the ship better than I do and hurt my ego." "That seems unlikely." "It absolutely is," Bits said. Jackson shot the ceiling a glare. Then quieter. "There's a colony world along our route, Epsilon Verdant, independent. Small but stable, good people, and they need help, agricultural help, terraforming work, stuff you actually know." She hesitated. "You spoke to them." "Maybe," he mumbled. "Sent a few messages. Told them I might have someone who could fix their nitrogen fixer disaster." Mira felt her breath catch. "Jackson, I can't simply join a settlement." "Why not?" "Because I have no standing. No family, no documentation." No chains," he said softly. The words struck her harder than she expected. She looked away out the viewport where distant stars stretched like threads of silver. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "Just know you have options, real ones. Options, choice. The very things she had been punished for wanting." Later, she found Jackson in the engine room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, polishing a piece of metal that looked beyond saving. He wasn't talking for once, just breathing. Heavy thoughts clouded his expression. "Jackson," she said quietly. He looked up, eyes catching hers with a steadiness she still wasn't used to. "You did not have to rescue me," she said. "Or take me aboard, or involve yourself in my life." "No," he agreed softly. "I didn't." "Then why?" He exhaled, leaning back against a panel. "Because I've been where you are. Not literally dumped on a death planet. That's new. But I know what it's like when the place that's supposed to be home decides you don't fit their definition anymore." Her breath stilled. "I left Earth 15 years ago," he continued. "People had expectations. I didn't want to live someone else's plan, so I didn't. Almost died a bunch of times, learned to fly this rust bucket, found a strange AI, and kept going." Mira sat beside him slowly, ribs aching but manageable. "And now?" Epsilon Verdant appeared beneath the Pathfinder like a quietly beating heart. Green valleys stitched between soft ridges, scattered domes glinting under a gentle yellow sun. It wasn't elegant like the crystal cities of Aeryll space. It wasn't engineered with mathematical precision or ceremonial symmetry. It was imperfect, alive, human in the way that made Mira's chest ache with a feeling she didn't yet recognize. Jackson guided the ship into the landing field. A patch of flattened soil and optimism, bordered by modular buildings grown outward over the years like a patchwork organism. People waved as the Pathfinder descended, some shielding their eyes from the dust the engines kicked up. "Friendly bunch," Jackson said, lowering the ramp. "Don't let it fool you. Their food is terrible, their jokes are worse, but their hearts, solid." Bits immediately corrected him through the overhead speaker. Statistically, only 71% of them possess organ systems compatible with being described as hearts. Jackson muttered something unflattering and shouldered a small pack before turning to Mira. Remember, no pressure. If you don't like it, we take off again. She nodded, though her stomach tightened as she stepped onto the soil. Gravity was gentle, lighter than Aeryll standards, and the air carried a clean sweetness, tinged with something earthy and unfamiliar. Her ears swiveled instinctively, cataloging new sounds. Machinery hum, children's laughter, the soft rustle of crops swaying beneath dome filters. Two figures approached, a human woman with short dark hair streaked in gray and an Aeryll man with empty ears where family cuffs would normally rest. Mira's breath caught. She recognized him before he even introduced himself. "Velis," she whispered. He gave a small, understanding smile. "I hoped it was you." She hadn't seen him since she was a child, when he had been quietly removed from the Aeryll genealogical registry after refusing a military binding. Exile had taken him long before it took her. "You look well," Mira managed. "Freedom does wonders for the complexion," he said lightly. Then, gently, "No cuffs. I figured something happened." She swallowed. Something did. He nodded once, no judgment, no prying. Just a shared recognition of the same wound carved into different years. The human woman extended a hand. "Chen, agriculture lead. Jackson tells me you know more about nitrogen-fixing cultures than our entire colony combined." Mira blinked, startled. "I studied xenobotany, but I never completed." "Then you're overqualified. Come on, we're dying out there." Chen and Velis walked her through the settlement at a brisk pace, pointing out irrigation channels, struggling greenhouses, climate stabilizers patched with tape and determination. Jackson followed behind them, hands in his pockets, wearing the expression of someone pretending not to watch her reaction. By the time they reached the northern dome, Mira understood the problem instantly. The soil's microbial cultures were mismatched. The aeration schedule was too sparse for a low-gravity world. Mineral supplements had been added inconsistently, likely due to limited resources. "This bacteria strain suffocates under light atmosphere," she said, kneeling beside a nutrient base. "It needs a higher magnesium ratio and a different hydration cycle. You're forcing a high-gravity ecosystem into a low-gravity environment." Chen's eyes widened. "We've been trying to figure that out for weeks." Velis crouched beside her. "Can you show us? We have the tools, mostly, sort of." "Probably," Jackson added. "But their wrench collection is tragic. I've seen better metalwork on space junk." Chen smacked his arm lightly. "Hush and let the genius talk." Mira felt her cheeks warm. Not embarrassment exactly, but something gentler, like sunlight through a window she hadn't realized she'd closed. She spent the next hour demonstrating the adjustments. Recalibrating soil pH, rearranging hydration cycles, teaching Chen how to coax bacteria into stabilizing. Velis worked beside her, asking quiet questions, his presence grounding. By the time they finished, the dome hummed with a new balance, a fragile but promising one. Chen exhaled like someone witnessing a miracle. "You just saved half our crop yield." "It wasn't difficult," Mira murmured. "That's not the point," Chen said firmly. "You knew what we didn't. That's worth more than you think." Mira looked away, throat tightening. Worth. She hadn't felt worth anything in a long time. That evening, as the twin moons rose over the settlement, Jackson found her standing alone at the ridge overlooking the valley. His boots crunched softly as he approached, but he didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, watching the wind ripple through the crops. "So," he finally said, voice low, "what do you think?" She inhaled. The air tasted clean, like beginnings. "It's peaceful." "It's a chance," Jackson said quietly, "a real one." She turned to him. His face was half-shadowed, but his eyes, those pale green shards of stubborn light, held a softness that unsettled her more than Exile ever had. "You're leaving soon," she said. He nodded. "Tomorrow. Contract starts in 3 days. Rocks don't scan themselves." A faint ache bloomed under her ribs. Ridiculous, she told herself. She'd known him only weeks, but the universe didn't measure connection in time, only in truth. "I'll come back," he added, voice gentle. "For months, maybe sooner if Bits decides we've scanned enough rocks." "You're assuming I'll still be here," she whispered. He smiled, small, sincere, and unbearably warm. "I hope you will. But if you're not, then I'll take you wherever you want to go." A breeze lifted the strands of her hair. She didn't realize she had moved until her hand touched his. Lightly, barely there, he stilled, not pulling away, not pressing closer. Just existing in the quiet space between them. Jackson, she said softly, thank you. For crashing into your exile like some kind of cosmic accident. For giving me a future I didn't know I could choose. His fingers curled, brushing hers, a touch that felt like the beginning of something neither of them dared name. You deserve more than what they gave you, he murmured. For the first time since she was cast from her lineage, the Pathfinder left Epsilon Verdant at dawn, its engines coughing into the pale blue sky like an old creature reluctant to wake. Mira stood beside Chen and Velis at the edge of the landing field, watching the ship climb until it shrank to a bright speck, then a flicker, then nothing. Jackson had looked back twice, once at the base of the ramp, once before sealing the hatch. The absence he left behind was quiet but immense, settling into her like the soft indentation of a hand that had just been holding hers. For the first time in her life, that emptiness didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like possibility. Life in the settlement unfolded slowly, like a new branch taking root. Mira worked in the domes with Chen each morning, refining nutrient cycles and adjusting filtration systems. Velis taught her how to maintain human-grade equipment, crude, imprecise, stubborn machines that ached under her touch like aging beasts. Children from 4 different species trailed after her in the fields, asking endless questions about her ears, her accent, her old world. She never told them the story of the council, but she told them about Aeryllis gardens, the spiraling blue flowers that bloomed at dusk, and the mathematical songs the elders used to teach constellations. Someone carved her a pair of wooden ear cuffs, simple circles etched with leaf patterns. Not lineage, not duty, just decoration, a gift with no price hidden inside. The first time she wore them, Chen smiled, Velis nodded, and Mira felt something loosening inside her, a knot she'd held for far too long. Days became weeks, weeks folded into months. She learned how to repair broken irrigation valves. She learned how to laugh at Chen's terrible jokes. She learned how to sleep without listening for the voices of ghosts. But always at sunset, she found herself at the ridge overlooking the valley, watching the horizon for a ship that might or might not return. The waiting didn't hurt. It simply was, until the day the sky cracked open with a familiar roar. The Pathfinder descended less gracefully than Mira remembered, listing slightly to one side, belching smoke from a panel that had definitely not been belching smoke 4 months ago. Bit's voice echoed faintly from inside the hull, broadcasting what sounded like a string of very pointed complaints. Chen groaned. He broke something again. Multiple systems, Velis added. Mira didn't wait for the ramp to lower. She was already walking, fast at first, then slowing as the thunder in her chest threatened to swallow her whole. The ramp hissed open. A wave of warm, recycled air spilled out, heavy with the scent she had come to associate with him. Machine oil, old metal, and something sharp and clean underneath it all. Then Jackson stepped into the light. He looked exactly the same and entirely different. A little more tired around the eyes, a little more scraped up. A little more himself. When he saw her, he stopped mid-step as if someone had grabbed his collar. "You're here," he said quietly. "You came back," she replied, breath unsteady. He descended the ramp slowly, almost cautiously, like approaching a creature he didn't want to startle. When he reached her, he hesitated, just a fraction, before asking, "So how'd it go? Did you fix their entire agricultural system without me?" "Most of it," she admitted. "I knew it," Bits said from the ship's speakers. "Statistically, she is far more competent than you." Jackson ignored the AI entirely. His focus stayed on Mira, searching her face with a quiet intensity that made her pulse accelerate. "You look," he stopped, brow furrowing as if the words weren't cooperating. "You look okay." "I am," she said softly. "For the first time, I am." His shoulders dropped in a relieved exhale, a sound she didn't know she needed until she heard it. "Good," he murmured. "That's really good." She studied him, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if fighting the urge to reach for her. The way his eyes traced her wooden ear cuffs before returning to her face. The way he stood close enough to feel the warmth coming off him, yet careful not to assume more than she offered. "You're staying?" he asked. "I mean, if you want to, or if you want to leave, the ship's yours for as long as you need it. Or if you want something else entirely, I'll." "Jackson." He froze, she stepped closer. Close enough for her shadow to touch his. "I want to stay," she said. Relief washed over his expression so openly that it struck her speechless. He scrubbed a hand across the back of his neck, flustered in a way she had never seen. "Okay," he said quietly. "Yeah, that's good." Silence settled, gentle, electric. Mira swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you staying too?" Jackson blinked. Me. Yes. He hesitated, staring at the settlement, at the valley, at the domes, at the sky, then finally back at her. I go where I'm needed, he said. Then you're needed here. The words left her before she could think too hard about them, truthful and frightening in equal measure. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Myra, he whispered, her name like a promise. She reached for his hand, not tentative this time, not unsure. Their fingers intertwined, slow and certain, like two separate orbits aligning into a single path. His hand was warm, steady, the anchor she had once feared relying on and now chose freely. Jackson squeezed gently. If this is where you are, then yeah, I'm staying. The Pathfinder hummed behind them, bits muttering something about inevitable structural failure if left unattended. But Myra barely heard it. For the first time since exile, she wasn't looking